An efficient and productive public service is vital to the socio-economic development of any nation. Since the return of the Fourth Republic in 1999, there have been several efforts to reform the public sector in a way that promotes efficiency, productivity, transparency, and accountability.
The public service reforms and reform generally is a continuous process. It always goes on. Even in the most advanced countries, they are still reforming on a daily basis. So if you go back to right back to the beginning of Nigeria, there have been efforts to improve the way things are done, and you know, you could define reforms as changing something from its current state to a better state. So that would always need to happen. At the turn of independence, we were reputed to have one of the best public services in the Commonwealth. We then had a very damaging civil war, which set us back, and then some 30 years or so of military rule, which is essentially a command and control kind of government, which makes it a bit difficult to hold government to account. But even within that, we have the Udoji reforms of 1974, which proposed a number of better ways of doing things, you know, budgeting by objectives, performance management, trying to benchmark the pay of the public sector with that of the private sector to make sure you can attract the right kind of talent into the public sector. Unfortunately, the government of the day only implemented the pay increases and left all the reforms that we're doing. So a lot of things that people say today about, you know, management by objectives and key performance indicators were all articulated by Udoji in 1974. And then we had a process where we removed the permanent secretaries as the accounting officers in ministries, and that sort of destroyed the independence of the civil service. We brought back the sex as accounting officers, but the mentality never really changed. In the middle of all that, Murtala Mohammed woke up one morning in 1975 and sacked 10,000 people over the radio, and that sort of gutted out the heart of the service. Fast forward to 1999, we came back to democratic rule and needed to put in place certain things to ensure that we could function as a democracy. And since then, a number of very important reforms have been done. We've changed our pension system to now make it contributory. Before now, everybody was entitled to a pension, but you couldn't be sure you'd actually get one. Now you're guaranteed a pension if you make the right contribution, so that was quite important. We privatized a number of public sector organizations like NITEL and NEPA, on which we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars every year. We improved our tax administration. Of course, we still need to increase our tax base, but at least the administration of taxes have since improved, both at federal and state levels. We put in place due process in our procurement system, and at the time that we put it in 2007, 60 kobo out of every naira we're spending was being misappropriated through procurement fraud. So that was quite significant. We repositioned some organizations that were not really performing well, organizations like NAFDAC. We've also repositioned the Federal Consumer Protection Council. Recently, we've put in place an ease of doing business regime that makes it easier to at least pass our ports without people extorting you for money. Of course, there are still issues, but it's a lot better than it was before.
The The most recent is the Professor Stephen Oronsaye Reforms and Reports, which looked at repositioning the public sector, streamlining ministries, departments, and agencies.
Well, the Oronsaye report focused on federal government agencies, and it had four main areas of focus. Five main areas of focus. So the first was to index the number of federal agencies we had, because believe it or not, before things like the Treasury single account and IPs, it's actually difficult to name a number of the agencies that we have. So the first thing was to do an inventory of all the agencies that we have. The second was to look at agencies where that were not serving any useful purpose and that we could scrap, right? The third was looking at agencies that are performing, if you like, duplicate functions that could be merged. The fourth was to look at those agencies that we shouldn't really be funding, that should be giving us money instead, because they're supposed to be, revenue generating, yet we are funding them through the budget, whereas similar private sector organizations are actually profitable. So why are we giving money to these organizations? And the fifth was to look at the governance structure of some organizations, sometimes to make them leaner, sometimes to make them more effective. That report was submitted in 2012. Since then, I think only one agency has ever been scrapped, which was the National Poverty Eradication Program, NAPEP. Since then, many other agencies have been created.
Proactive governments periodically take steps to reform their public sector with emphasis on capacity building, digitization, strengthening of institutions, and improved remuneration.
No matter the laudable policy thrust of government, it is the civil servants, the workforce of the service that is actually going to carry out these policies, because we are actually the engine room for government. And if the workforce is not well trained and does not have the capacity to effectively carry out all these laudable programs, then there is a very big problem.
Part of the reasons governance in Africa is experiencing challenges is due to the dearth in the reform of the public sector. This informed the establishment of the AIG-Imoukhuede Foundation, dedicated to supporting transformation of Nigeria's public sector through reforms in partnership with the Office of the Head of the Civil Service of the Federation.
My notion is this, that we cannot afford to live in Africa with this underinvestment in capacity in the public sector, because we will all suffer for it. And so Africa Initiative for Governance is all about building capacity in the public sector. So the first thing we started was scholarships to Oxford University's Lavaknik School of Government to study an MPP on the condition that you must come back and work for your home country.
It's a very welcome initiative, and I commend the AIG-Imoukhuede Initiative for Governance for partnering with the public sector to develop things like a proper performance management system, to develop a public sector index with which you can measure the performance of public sector organizations.
So far, it has hosted several capacity building sessions for civil servants in the country and rewarded top performing public servants in cash and sponsored others for special courses in leading global institutions on governance and public service. Recently, the AIG-Imoukhuede Foundation facilitated a United Kingdom study tour, which had the head of Civil Service of the Federation, Dr. Folashade Yemieson, and some senior public servants participating alongside the visionary, Mr. Aigboje Imoukhuede. This is an attestation to the fact that strategic partnership between the public service sector and the private sector has the potency to drive national productivity and effective governance.